After the most recent OTA, there were a bunch of cards that got buffed, but one of them was a card I definitely did not expect to be playing even after the buff, and I was wrong. We are playing a Bishop deck in High Infinite to a shockingly successful win rate at a shockingly high rank. People often ask me what my favorite type of decks to play are, and these have been the traditional answer, but they've been nerfed so many times that they haven't really been playable. But I still have extremely fond memories of starting out Marvel Snap, playing Angela Bishop decks, and likening them to the Miracle Grow archetype in Magic the Gathering from like the year 2000, based on Quirion Dryad, and that is a skillful part of the game that I really desperately miss. As a friend of mine once put it, my favorite games are the games that I managed to win 2 lanes by like 2 points, where the cards and the way that they scale are incredibly impactful and they matter a lot. And so when we talk about my favorite decks in Marvel Snap, decks like this, Angela Bishop, Elsa Scalers type stuff, I really enjoy playing that. I really enjoy playing Kitty Pryde decks, but frankly, they haven't been good for a while. So what was my solution to make them fit into the current metagame? My solution is a Killmonger. Now, you might be thinking, KMBest, Killmonger is a pretty ridiculous thing to play when you're playing not only Kitty Pryde and Hydrobob, but also Kate Bishop, which creates 1-drops that you sometimes want to stay around. And to that I say, you simply just have to play around all of that. One of the best things that this deck does is it doesn't actually need those 1-drops on the board. In fact, it very often wants 1-drops in the hand on those final turns of the game so that you are able to do ridiculous things with Hit-Monkey. You're able to use your extra energy from a Hope Summers to actually play them out later. And Killmonger is an incredibly relevant tech card right now, absolutely blowing out Thanos's, but also doing some very other reasonable things, and B, cheap. That spot in the deck can be a bunch of different tech cards, but the cheaper it is, the better it is. Other contenders for that spot were things like Rogue, but stuff like Enchantress and Shang-Chi might be a little bit too expensive. So what this deck is trying to do is leverage the fact that nobody ever is playing around a Killmonger out of a deck that's playing this many 1-drops. It just simply is not happening. Unfortunately, I had such a success with this list that I ran into multiple people copying it while I was filming the games for this video the first time I had actually streamed the list. So this is a list that now, unfortunately, I fear people might expect a Killmonger out of. However, I do think that the real lesson here is that these shells, the Angela Bishop shells, are not incredibly far off being legit in this current metagame. Angela, Bishop, Hit-Monkey, these are cards that are typically regarded as like a little bit subpar. And they are. Like, to be clear, playing a deck like this does ask a little bit more of you than some other archetypes might. It also has a little bit less room for tech and a little bit more requirements on what that tech can be, because it really wants its tech to be as cheap as possible. I don't want to sit here and tell you that this shell is obviously back forever, but it is legitimately relevant, and with less people playing Rocket and Groot, which was a main problem with being a Hope, Angela, and Elsa deck, there is some real room for this deck to succeed. I had almost a 60% win rate, gaining 35 cubes in about 50 games in High Infinite, all the way up to rank 17 at the time. I think that this should demonstrate that there is room to think a little bit outside the box with cards that other people might be underrating. However, I don't want to give myself all the credit for thinking outside of the box here. I got this list from Derek, and much like with the Season Passler list, all I really did was change one card, and then the deck started performing a lot better. In the Season Passler, that was taking out Loki for Sam Wilson. Clearly, I am a genius. In this deck, it was taking out Luke Cage to put in Killmonger. I really cannot emphasize just how good a surprise Killmonger is in a deck like this. It's obviously not the greatest thing on earth, but with so many people playing Thanos and the other 1-drops that it can hit, it was very key to the win rate and cube rate that I had. Kitty Pryde is on the short list of my favorite cards in Marvel Snap, and in large part that's because of the way she works with other cards that I enjoy: Angela, Bishop, Elsa, Hope Summers. This whole playstyle is something that I enjoy a lot. I get to take a lot of game actions, and crucially, towards the end of the game, I have scaling threats that can threaten lanes on their own, and then I have a lot of agency towards where I distribute power. That is the main thing that makes Kitty Pryde decks tick, is that you have a lot of control over where the power ends up going on the final few turns of the game. Kitty Pryde helps enable this by herself growing and collecting various buffs over the course of the game from Elsa Bloodstone, and that means that this card is able to occasionally be a very large unit on the final turn of the game, where you have the most information about where those points actually need to go. That is generally what this deck is trying to leverage. Information, both in the form of an unexpected Killmonger and in the form of large amounts of points on the final turn that are hard to predict, and you know where you need them, and your opponent doesn't know where they're going. I feel like you kind of need another one drop in here. Like, Hydrobob is just here because he's a 1/4, right? Like, that's what he's here for. I do think it's worth pointing out that you should almost always, not always, but very often, avoid playing this guy early. Not only because of Killmonger, but just because a lot of the time, again, the strength of this deck is that it gets the points where it wants to go. You have, generally speaking, a little bit less points than a lot of the other meta decks. But what you have in exchange is a greater ability to explode on the final turn and use precision to actually put the points in important spots, abandoning a lane or challenging all three, depending on the context of the game. Do think about that when you play Hydrobob in here. It's usually not always going to be the right thing to do to just run him out there on turn one. You don't know that 4 points is going to matter there. You don't know whether he'll get snapped out or not. Very often he can be better later. Angela is quite a solid card, but far from a star. I think in terms of things that scale upwards, she is a little bit worse than stuff like Elsa Bloodstone, a little bit worse even than Bishop. And a lot of that is because you have to play on her lane, which makes counterplay like Rocket and Groot really devastating for you. That kind of stuff is very bad. Rocket and Groot, I believe, is the reason that Derek was playing a Luke Cage in here and I swapped it for a Killmonger, so now we are even weaker to that card. This is a genuinely solid card, but far from what she used to be, a 2/0 that gained +2 for each of these, but she can still be a decent contributing presence. And at 2/3, you can very often play her for maybe 5 points on the final turn of the game. It's not special, but she is just generally solid. Hawkeye Kate Bishop is a card you'll want to be a little bit careful about, but mostly what she's here to do is be pretty okay, give you some things that might be decent, and lull your opponent into a false sense of security regarding the existence of Killmonger. Now, you aren't necessarily opposed to 1-drops. You are going to have to plan out a lot of your final turns. That's a definite thing that you're going to have to think about. And because of that, if you don't have a Mysterio, you're very often going to want to save the 1-drop so that you can play them alongside a Hit-Monkey, because that's the most stuff you can get in terms of getting Hit-Monkey to a reasonable size. Keep in mind that this is still just a decent card. Getting 1-drops in general is pretty solid, and because you are able to gain extra energy with Hope Summers, you're very often able to just sort of weave them in where they are needed. Sam Wilson is like Angela, but I think a little bit stronger, maybe just a little bit stronger, maybe a little slightly stronger. Very good card. I think there's not a lot of compelling reasons not to be running this card in this list right now. I do hate to make yet another Sam Wilson deck, but as this deck is already fairly short on points, giving up one of the best 2-drop scalers in the game because he's popular feels like probably not the greatest idea. Mysterio counts as 3 cards for your Hit-Monkey, but more importantly will carry buffs from Gwenpool extremely well. A decent amount of the time, you're going to want to order such that you have limited amounts of cards in your hand to increase the odds of Gwenpool buffs going on to Mysterio. A Gwenpool buff that hits Mysterio is effectively +6, whereas a Gwenpool buff that hits basically anything else is effectively +2. So this is a card that not only gets benefits from Gwenpool buffs, but also in those benefits distributes them across multiple lanes. Another synergy here is with Elsa Bloodstone. And Elsa Bloodstone on the board, you're very often filling up all 3 lanes, especially with a Mysterio. So between a Gwenpool proc and, of course, the proc from Elsa, you can very easily be playing a 4, an 8, and a 4 with your Mysterio. That's a powerful thing to do. At 3-1, I genuinely do think Bishop would not make the cut in this deck. At 3-2, I think he genuinely is. But there is a lot of tension between Bishop and some of the other 3-drops because, especially Elsa, you really want to be filling up one lane, and Bishop really wants to, as a scaler, be on his own in another lane. So typically what'll happen, and this is part of why Sam Wilson is good, is that you can play like a 2-drop in the Sam Wilson lane, Bishop somewhere else, and then Elsa Kitty the Sam Wilson shield lane, right? Like that is the kind of thing that you are able to do because of the power of Sam Wilson getting a card onto the board. That is kind of why Bishop works here, because otherwise you would be forced to choose very often between getting a Bishop out early and getting your early procs on Elsa. And that can be a tough choice depending on what's happening. When you get a Bishop out on 3 and you make that sort of play pattern thing happen, and then you get an Elsa out on 4 with a Kitty, you are really rolling downhill. Those are the games where I've talked about the sort of relatively lower point ceiling of this deck. In those games, you are really pushing like actual real meta deck numbers because of how strong these cards can be. Hit-Monkey is very often a card that I think people think is bigger than it is. And there are 2 pieces of advice I want to give you for Hit-Monkey. The first is make sure you actually know how big he is. I think there's like this thing where people have been playing for a while are just like, Hit-Monkey, he's huge, he's gonna win me a lane, and then he's like 9 points, and you're like, wait a minute, that's the size of a good speed. That's not worth doing. That happens a lot. It really, really does. And so you really have to like make sure you're legitimately counting with this card. The second is there's another thing people do where they just like shortcut this, and they shouldn't. Hit-Monkey doesn't need to be the last card you play. It can be the first card you play. It'll still see the other cards you played that turn. That matters, and people mess it up all the time. Killmonger was the absolute GOAT of this strategy, just the absolute king. The deck is named after him. I started succeeding after I put him in there. Card is extremely strong into Thanos right now, and that is the main target of this. But you'll be surprised at the kind of games you can win when people just don't expect the tech card you actually have. And I think a lot of Killmonger's value in this deck for me was related to that, right? Like this was a card that I beat discard decks when they were relying on a Meek, right? The point of this card is that like there are a lot of situations where people are counting on 1-drops to be there, and they never expect a deck like this to be the deck that removes those 1-drops from the board, which means he has some pretty massive cube equity. That's a pretty specific thing to say, though, because after I make this video, they might be expecting a deck like this to have a Killmonger in it. In fact, if you see someone playing something like this, I would expect a Killmonger at this point. I was like 10 games into the stream, and I played a full mirror. It was the exact same deck with the Killmonger. And I know they got it from me because I had just made the swap to put the Killmonger in for the Luke Cage. Like there is, and then after the stream, I raided somebody and they were playing it with the Killmonger, and I asked about it, and they were like, "Yeah, I saw you playing this," and it's spread. Even in the course of the stream, it's spread. And so after making this video, I mean, I can't imagine it won't. As far as engines go, it's fairly common knowledge that the consensus on Elsa Bloodstone is that she's a little bit worse of an engine than typically things that we're seeing in the metagame commonly. I will say this much, though. She's not that much worse. This is a card that if it were a 3-5, I think it would be like actually kind of busted. Like very, very close to being exceptionally strong, Elsa Bloodstone right now. I don't think she's ever going to, like, get to that. I don't think they're going to 3-5 her. I think that'd be kind of ridiculous. But it is worth pointing out that she is genuinely quite close to being a powerful engine in line with things like Victoria Hand and things of that nature, right? Obviously, I think cards like V-Hand get a little bit of an edge for being cheaper and only 1 point less and arguably easier to activate, honestly. But it is worth talking about how close this card is because I think people look at it. There's this thing that happens a lot in card games. Well, they'll look at something that's like a 90, out of 100, and then they'll look at something that's like an 85 out of 100, and because the 90 exists, the 85 is unplayable. And in a sense of fully optimized win rate, that's true. If you have a choice between a 90 and an 85, you're never going to want to actually play the 85 if that's what you care about. But I think using the word unplayable or like we can't do this, things of that nature, gives a sort of false inflation of how much better a 90 is than an 85. Because by percentage difference, it's not that much. There are several cards in this list that struggle with Rocket and Groot. Hope Summers is one of the cards that struggles the most. She's also, I think, the hardest card in this deck to play, in the sense that I find it very difficult to figure out whether I should care about her extra energy and whether I should care about, say, Elsa's points more. Sometimes that decision is made for you. She also comes in conflict with Bishop a lot. Like, the Elsa, Bishop, Hope trinity is, like, actually a fairly contextual thing to evaluate. One of the hardest things I find to do in this deck is doing Hope math and saying, what does that let me do next turn? And then what does that let me do 2 turns from now? And then what does that let me do 3 turns from now? What is my full game plan? And I basically have to figure that out on turn 3 when I'm comparing Bishop, Hope, and Elsa and trying to figure out what I'm supposed to actually be doing. Like, how many points am I giving up by not going for Bishop or Elsa here? How am I going to use the energy to make up those points? Stuff like that is what you have to be thinking about. Gwenpool is, if we're honest, mostly here to hit Mysterio, but she's not going to be bad anyway. You really only care about point output here. There are certainly decks where Gwenpool is less good than here because she is liable to hit something that you don't necessarily want to play, right? So when you have cards like Shang-Chi and Juggernaut and like your Agamotto deck or whatever, you are going to play them regardless, and Gwenpool's 2s aren't really going to matter a lot of the time. They can, but they're not. And so, like, those cards are also cards that take up large amounts of energy, generally speaking, and we try to keep the curve in here low. This is why we talked about cheap tech cards as opposed to expensive ones. We have the ability to increase our output on those final turns thanks to Hope Summers, so we are able to, like, cheat it a little bit, but not consistently enough, in my humble opinion, to get more expensive tech cards in here because of the way Gwenpool works. So this is a card that you really just want to be hitting Mysterio with, and a lot of what you can do to make that happen is stuff you should be doing. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. We're going to jump into some gameplay, and I will see you in the next one. I'm so mad. I was looking directly at the Sam. The desire sensor figured it out. Oh, you're doing all of those now. So their hand is entirely swarms and one scorn. Correct? You have to get to above 9 over here. And then we have to get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, -1, 5. And then this plays for 11. 5 plus 11, 15. We lose that then? Oh, no, wait, no, they lose 3 from the blade. Yeah, I'm with it. That's exactly what we want to see. That's exactly the play we want to see. Now, unless I've done my math wrong, and I don't think I have, guess where the real Mysterio is? Another Killmonger victory. Nobody plays around that fuck. I took the plunge. That is a little crazy. That is unthinkable in some manner. Well, that's something. Oh, yes. If I lose, it's because I'm losing the left in the middle here, I think. Oh, shit. Never mind. Killmonger mongering some fucking kills, dude. Holy shit. Killmonger mongering some fucking kills, dog. That dude is mongering. Wow. They're just us, but like worse. And you can tell they're worse because they're playing Captain Carter. That was a skillful leader by us. Hi, Mr. President. Wow. Okay, they're a She-Hulk deck. Alright, that's interesting. No Blue Marvel? Blue Marvel was possible. It was like Blue Marvel Stone Mockingbird was kind of the shit that I lost to there, I think. Interesting. Pretty hard to win a Grand Prix in this context, I think. But I don't super need the energy. Like, I'm probably losing the Grand Prix to just the fact that a demon exists. But, as is, like, I'm pretty light on guys in the first place, so it's sort of whatever. I'm kind of wondering if they're, like, what exactly, like, are they V-hand stuff? What's the dealio here? How's my day going? It's good. Need to advertise the podcast with Jerry more? Yeah, I probably should. Agree that I probably should do that. They discarded their She-Hulk, though. So it's like... I know this looks weird. But I kind of want to make sure they have Cryo. Yeah. I mean, like, would you play around this? I fucking wouldn't. I would not play around this. I'd be so mad if this shit happened to me, dude. No one plays around the goddamn Killmonger. Whatcha? Bishop returned to being playable again. pretty much all we're doing is bullshitting around. I need to clean this fucking room up. It's a mess. You fight on that lie, huh? Crimson Cosmos basically means I lose. Fairly certain Crimson Cosmos just says, hey, you lose. I can get up to 10 power in it. Okay, maybe it means they lose too. That's good. So I do this. Yeah. Hold on. Alright, and now Galacta hits everything, or Gwenpool hits everything. Okay, come on, man. Oh my god. Wait. There's no way he's playing Killmonger in this without me, right? Like, right? There's no way he's doing that without watching me, correct? Okay. Did I lose? Oh my god. They forgot to move their shield to the left. Also, Slim Charles, you're in here. You can say hi. There's nobody play three things. Honestly, I thought I was pretty screwed there. I felt pretty screwed, I can tell you that much. Sammy Dubs. I like that. Definitely into that. Ooh. Fuck do we suppose this means? Nothing good. Christ! That's certainly a lane. They're just like Iron Man over here, right? And I'm just fucking dead because they have like 44 or some shit. Like, I can do something, but it's not something relevant, right? Like, this is a lot of power, and they are definitely boomer snapping. I don't know, man. Okay, I guess Killmonger gets him. I guess Killmonger gets him. I guess the Monger of Kills claims another victim. They just get shenaniganed. Another, like, that sounds really bad. That sounds like not really a deck. Thanos Gamer. They're about to play so many things and get blown out by a Killmonger. Surely, right? Boy, that's fucking horrifying. Does Gwenpool deserve 6k tokens? I don't know what deserve means in that context. But she's pretty solid. Is this a certified cook? I don't know about a certified cook. It's a deck. Gosh, that's a lot of power on 1-drops. I kind of want to try this. They play their Thanos now, yeah? Wait, I'm a moron. No, I'm not a moron. 11. Okay, we're good. Gosh, that's unfortunate for them. Gosh, you know what's really sad about this situation for my opponent? That they got 13 power on fucking Reality Stone. You know what's really sad about this situation for my opponent is that I didn't feel confident snapping back, for whatever it's worth. But I did fucking beat the shit out of him. Goddamn, Killmonger again.